The great hall fell silent as the last council member took their seat. 200 species from across 3 galaxies waited for the session to begin. The lights dimmed slightly, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. Ambassador Vector stood at his station, his gray skin smooth and his posture confident. He had done this 40 times before. 40 successful first contacts with primitive worlds. 40 civilizations brought peacefully into the Galactic Council. This would be number 41. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants. The dominant species called themselves humans. They had only been transmitting radio signals into space for about 100 years. Compared to the thousands of years most council species had been exploring the stars, humans were infants. Vector had studied their transmissions during his preparation. Humans seemed divided into many groups, speaking different languages, following different customs. They still fought small wars among themselves. Their technology was crude, but showed promise. They had barely reached their own moon, with primitive rockets. Perfect candidates for uplift, Vector thought. They needed guidance. They needed the wisdom of older species to help them avoid the mistakes of youth. The Council could offer them so much. Clean energy, faster than light travel, medical advances that would eliminate disease. All they had to do was accept the offer and follow the rules. The Council voted. The decision was unanimous. Vector would go to Earth, make contact with their leaders, and extend the invitation. He bowed to the assembly and left to prepare his ship. The journey took 3 weeks. Vector spent the time reviewing everything humanity had ever broadcast into space. He watched their entertainment programs and found them amusing. Humans seemed obsessed with stories about conflict and resolution. Their music was surprisingly moving, full of emotion and rhythm. He studied their languages and chose English as his primary communication method. It seemed to be the most widespread. His translation device would handle the rest. He practiced human gestures and expressions, wanting to make a good first impression. When his ship entered Earth's solar system, he sent the prepared greeting message. Within hours, he received a response. Earth's governments had agreed to meet with him. They had chosen a landing site in a remote desert area in a place called Nevada. Vector descended through Earth's atmosphere carefully. His ship was small and designed for diplomacy, not intimidation. It landed gently on the prepared site, sending up a small cloud of dust. He checked his appearance one final time in the mirror and activated the exit ramp. The air hit him first. It was thinner than his homeworld, and it smelled strange, dry and dusty with hints of something else he could not identify. The sun felt hot on his skin, hotter than he expected. He made a mental note about Earth's climate. A small group of humans waited about 50 meters from his ship. There were 3 of them. Vector walked forward slowly, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. The Xanthari had learned long ago that first impressions mattered greatly. The oldest human stepped forward. He was tall by Xanthari standards, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. His skin was darker than in most of the broadcasts Vector had watched, tanned by what must be years under this harsh sun. "Welcome to Earth," the human said, his voice deep and steady. "My name is Jake Harrison. I speak on behalf of our world's governments." Vector bowed in the Xanthari way, then extended his hand in the human custom he had studied. Jake Harrison took it and shook firmly. The grip was strong, stronger than Vector expected. He tried not to show his surprise. "I am Ambassador Vector of the Xanthari species, representative of the Galactic Council," he replied. His English was perfect, polished during the long journey. "I bring greetings from 200 civilized worlds." Jake Harrison smiled slightly and gestured to his companions. "This is Dr. Lisa Martinez, our lead xenobiologist, and Commander Ryan Blake from our defense forces." The woman named Lisa Martinez was younger, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. Her eyes were bright with curiosity and intelligence. She smiled warmly and shook his hand with a gentler grip. Commander Ryan Blake was built differently from the other 2. His shoulders were broader, his movements more controlled. He wore a military uniform and shook hands with professional courtesy. His eyes, Vector noticed, never stopped watching the surroundings. They led him to a building that had been constructed specifically for this meeting. It was simple, but functional, with climate control that made Vector more comfortable. They sat around a table, and refreshments were offered. Vector politely declined. Not sure if human food would be compatible with his biology, Jake Harrison leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. We've been expecting someone to make contact eventually. Our scientists theorized that we weren't alone. But I'll admit, we didn't expect it to happen in my lifetime. Vector allowed himself a small smile. Your species has been quite loud, broadcasting your presence across the stars. We noticed your signals decades ago. The Council decided it was time to make formal contact. And what does this Council want with Earth? Commander Blake asked. His tone was neutral, but cautious. This was the moment Vector had prepared for. He activated a small holographic display and began his presentation. Images of Council worlds appeared, showing gleaming cities, advanced ships, and peaceful cooperation among different species. The Galactic Council is a federation of civilized species, dedicated to peace and mutual prosperity, Vector explained. We offer Earth membership in this great alliance. With it comes access to technology that would advance your civilization by centuries. Clean, unlimited energy. Medical knowledge that could eliminate most of your diseases. Faster than light travel that would open the galaxy to exploration. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her excitement barely contained. That's incredible. What would Earth need to do in return? Very little, Vector said smoothly. Simply agree to follow Council protocols. These are basic rules that all member species follow. Restrictions on expansion into certain protected areas. Adherence to Council law in interstellar matters. And the surrender of certain weapon types that the Council has deemed too dangerous for civilized use. The room grew quieter. Jake Harrison's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. Commander Blake's jaw tightened slightly. Surrender our weapons, Jake Harrison repeated slowly. Which weapons specifically? Vector pulled up another display. Nuclear devices, biological weapons, certain chemical weapons. These are relics of your violent past. You won't need them anymore. The Council provides security for all member worlds. Jake Harrison looked at Dr. Martinez, then at Commander Blake. Some unspoken communication passed between them. When Harrison turned back to Vector, his expression was carefully neutral. That's a generous offer, Ambassador. We'll need time to consider it and discuss it with our governments. This isn't a decision one man can make. Vector nodded. This was expected. Primitive species always needed time to understand the magnitude of what was being offered. Of course. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, perhaps you could show me your world? I would like to understand humanity better. End quote. Dr. Martinez brightened. I'd be happy to give you a tour. We have so much to show you. 12. They spent the rest of the day making arrangements. Vector would stay on Earth for 2 weeks, learning about human culture and civilization. Dr. Martinez would serve as his primary guide. Commander Blake would handle security. Jake Harrison would coordinate with various governments to prepare a response to the Council's offer. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Vector felt satisfied. The first contact had gone smoothly. The humans seemed reasonable and impressed by what the Council offered. In 2 weeks, he would return home with another successful integration to his record. He had no way of knowing that in those 2 weeks, everything he believed about primitive species would be shattered. The confident diplomat standing in the desert that evening would return to the Council changed, unable to speak of what he had learned, with fear written permanently in his eyes. Dr. Lisa Martinez arrived early the next morning with a vehicle she called a car. It was a simple ground transport. Nothing impressive by galactic standards, but it moved smoothly along the paved roads. Vector sat in the passenger seat, watching the desert landscape give way to signs of civilization. "We'll start with one of our major cities," Lisa explained as she drove. "I think you'll find it interesting. Then tomorrow, we'll visit some museums, so you can learn about our history." The city appeared on the horizon gradually. Buildings rose higher and higher as they approached, made of glass and steel and concrete. Millions of humans lived here, packed together in relative harmony. Vector found it similar to cities on other primitive worlds he had visited. They walked through busy streets. Humans rushed past them, barely glancing at the gray-skinned alien in their midst. A few stopped to stare, but most seemed more focused on their own business. Lisa explained that the government had prepared the population for his visit through their media networks. "Everyone knows you're here," she said with a slight smile. "You're the biggest news story in human history. But people still have jobs to do, and lives to live." They visited markets where humans bought food and goods. They toured a hospital, where Lisa showed him human medical technology. It was primitive compared to council standards, but Vector noted that humans had made impressive progress for their age. Their doctors were skilled at working with the limited tools they had. At a school, children gathered around him with wonder in their eyes. They asked questions in high voices, and Lisa translated when necessary. Vector found himself charmed by their curiosity and innocence. These young humans reminded him of Zenthari children, full of potential and hope. The day passed pleasantly. Vector began to relax. These humans were not so different from other species he had helped integrate into the council. They would adapt well to galactic civilization. The next morning, Lisa took him to a large building in the city center. "This is our Museum of Human History," she announced. "I thought you should understand where we came from." The museum was vast. The first exhibits showed ancient human civilizations. Vector saw pottery and tools from thousands of years ago. He saw art and jewelry and the remains of old buildings. Lisa explained how humans had developed agriculture, writing, and mathematics independently in different parts of their world. Then they reached a section filled with weapons. Old weapons. Swords and spears and axes made of metal and stone. Display cases showed armor made from various materials. Full suits of metal plates that warriors wore into battle. "Humans fought each other for most of our history," Lisa said quietly. Her tone had changed. "Become more serious. Every civilization you see in the early exhibits eventually came into conflict with others. We fought over land, resources, beliefs, and power." Vector nodded. This was not unusual. Most primitive species went through a violent phase before achieving unity. The Zenthari had their own ancient wars, though they were brief and ended over 5,000 years ago. But as they moved through the museum, Vector began to feel uncomfortable. The weapons became more advanced. Guns that fired metal projectiles. Cannons that could destroy fortifications. The scale of the conflicts grew larger and larger. They entered a section dedicated to something called World War I. Lisa explained that it happened just over a century ago. The displays showed photographs of devastation, trenches filled with mud and bodies, cities reduced to rubble. The numbers on the plaques made Vector's skin turn a shade paler. Over 17 million dead in just 4 years. "How did your species survive this?" he asked, his voice weak. "We're resilient," Lisa said simply. "We rebuilt. We learned. We moved forward." Then she led him to the next section. World War II. 20 years after the first one ended, humans went to war again. This conflict was even larger. The photographs showed destruction on a scale that made Vector physically ill. Cities burning. Mass graves. Concentration camps, where millions were systematically murdered. Over 70 million dead. In 6 years, Vector had to sit down on a bench. His legs felt weak. No species in the Council's records had experienced such devastating losses and survived. Most civilizations collapsed after losing even a fraction of that number. Your species nearly destroyed itself, he whispered. Yes, Lisa agreed. We came close. But we didn't. We ended the war, established international organizations to prevent future conflicts, and began the long process of healing. She led him to another display, and Vector wished she hadn't. It showed a weapon called an atomic bomb. The explanation described how humans had split the atom and turned it into a tool of destruction. The photographs showed 2 cities in a nation called Japan, completely leveled. Shadows burned into walls where people had been vaporized instantly. You actually used these weapons, Vector said, his voice barely audible. Against yourselves. Twice, Lisa confirmed. And then we built thousands more. For decades, we lived under the threat of complete nuclear annihilation. We called it the Cold War. 2 major powers pointed enough weapons at each other to destroy the planet several times over. Vector stood up, needing to move. Species that developed planet-destroying weapons and used them on themselves did not survive. They could not survive. The psychological trauma alone should have collapsed their civilization. But you're still here, he said, more to himself than to Lisa. You survived your own weapons. We did more than survive, Lisa said. We became stronger. We learned to cooperate better. The threat of mutual destruction forced us to find other ways to resolve our conflicts. We're not perfect. We still have wars, but nothing on the scale of those world wars. We've spent the last 80 years slowly learning to work together. They walked through more modern exhibits. Humans had gone to space despite having no natural ability to survive there. They had built stations that orbited Earth. They had walked on their moon. They had sent probes to the edge of their solar system and beyond. All of this accomplished in less than a century after nearly destroying themselves. That evening, Commander Ryan Blake joined them for dinner. They sat in a quiet restaurant, and Vector tried to process everything he had learned. The food was strange, but edible. Lisa had assured him it was safe for his biology. Dr. Martinez showed me your museums today, Vector said carefully. Your history is very violent. Blake nodded, cutting his food with precise movements. It is. But violence is part of nature. Prey and predators. Survival of the fittest. Humans evolved as hunters. We have those instincts. But you've moved beyond them, Vector said, wanting to believe it. Blake looked up, his eyes sharp. Have we? Or have we just channeled them differently? Tomorrow, I'll show you our current military capabilities. You should understand what Earth can do before you return to your council. Vector felt a chill run through him. He had assumed human military technology would be primitive. Ballistic missiles at most. Nothing that could threaten council ships. The next morning, Blake took him to a military installation. The security was tight. Soldiers stood at every checkpoint, their movements disciplined and efficient. They saluted Blake as he passed, and their eyes tracked Vector with professional assessment. Blake showed him rows of combat vehicles, tanks that could tear through fortifications, aircraft that moved faster than sound, ships that could launch missiles from underwater. The technology was more advanced than Vector had expected. Then they went to an airfield. A young pilot named Amy Collins greeted them. She was small for a human, barely coming up to Blake's shoulder, but she moved with confidence. She wore a flight suit and carried her helmet under one arm. Ambassador, this is Lieutenant Collins. She's going to demonstrate our fighter capabilities, Blake said. Amy smiled at Vector. Nice to meet you, sir. I hope you don't mind noise. These birds can get loud. She climbed into a machine that looked too small and fragile to fly. The engines roared to life with a sound that made Vector cover his ears. Then, the fighter jet screamed down the runway and leaped into the sky. Vector watched through binoculars as Amy put the aircraft through maneuvers that should have been impossible. She turned so sharply that the G-forces should have crushed her. She dove and climbed and rolled with precision that matched the best council pilots. She's pulling 9 Gs in some of those turns, Blake said casually. That's 9 times Earth's gravity. Most council species can't handle more than 3 or 4 before passing out. Humans can withstand it, with proper training and equipment. The jet landed smoothly, and Amy climbed out smiling. She seemed completely unaffected by the punishment she had just put her body through. How was that? She asked cheerfully. Terrifying, Vector answered honestly. She laughed. Wait until you see what we're building next. These planes are almost 20 years old. The new generation will be even better. Blake drove him back to his quarters as the sun set. Vector sat in silence, his mind racing. Humans were not what he had expected. They were not a young species stumbling toward the stars. They were something else entirely, something that had survived planetary warfare, nuclear weapons, and their own violent nature. Something that turned their environment's harshness into strength. Something that flew machines at speeds and forces that would kill most species. That night, Vector tried to write his preliminary report to the council. He deleted it and started over 3 times. How could he explain what he was learning? How could he make them understand that humanity was not like other primitive species? He finally gave up and went to sleep, but his dreams were filled with images of burning cities, mushroom clouds, and the smile on Amy Collins's face as she climbed out of her fighter jet after pulling forces that should have killed her. Tomorrow, Lisa had promised to show him more about human biology and psychology. Vector was beginning to dread what else he might learn. Dr. Lisa Martinez introduced Vector to a colleague the next morning. Dr. Ben Carter was a biologist who specialized in human physiology. He was a cheerful man with a round face and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. His office was filled with books and models of human anatomy. Ambassador. It's an honor, Ben said, shaking hands enthusiastically. Lisa tells me you want to understand how humans work. Physically speaking, I mean. Where should we start? Vector settled into a chair that was slightly too small for him. I want to understand your species at a fundamental level. The Council needs accurate information about human biology. Ben pulled up a holographic display showing a human body. Well, let's start with the basics. Humans are persistence hunters. Do you know what that means? Vector shook his head. It means our ancestors hunted by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, Ben explained. Other predators are faster in short bursts, but humans can run for hours, days, even, with proper training. We just keep going until our prey can't anymore. Then we kill it. The casual way Ben said this made Vector uncomfortable. The Zenthari were herbivores. The concept of hunting and killing for food was alien to their culture. Humans are also incredibly adaptable. Ben continued, zooming in on different body systems. We can survive in almost any environment on Earth, from frozen Arctic regions to scorching deserts, from sea level to high mountains where the air is thin. We just adapt. He showed Vector images of humans living in different climates. People thriving in places that would kill most council species within hours. They wore clothing and built shelters, but their bodies also adapted. Their skin changed color based on sunlight exposure. Their blood produced more oxygen-carrying cells at high altitudes. Now, here's where it gets interesting, Ben said, his excitement growing. Human bodies are incredibly redundant. We can lose significant portions of our organs and survive. 1 kidney instead of 2. 1 lung. Parts of our liver. Large sections of our intestines. Even portions of our brain. He showed Vector medical scans. A man named Chris Sullivan, who had survived a metal rod that went completely through his skull. The doctors had removed it, and Chris had recovered with only minor deficits. That should have killed him, Vector whispered. Should have, yes. But the human brain can rewire itself. Other areas take over the functions of damaged sections. It's called neuroplasticity, Ben explained. We're very hard to kill permanently. He pulled up more cases. A woman named Maria Gonzalez, who had lost an arm in an accident. She now had a mechanical replacement that she controlled with her thoughts through neural interfaces. We regularly replace body parts with machines, Ben said proudly. Hearts, joints, limbs, eyes, ears. If something breaks, we fix it or replace it. We've had people survive with artificial hearts for years, decades even. Vecthor felt sick. The Zenthari body was delicate and precise. Damage to major organs meant death. The idea of cutting open a living being and replacing parts with machines seemed barbaric. And our immune system, Ben continued, pulling up another display. It's aggressive. Almost too aggressive sometimes. Your body fights off infections, quietly. The human immune system wages war. Fever to burn out invaders. Inflammation to isolate threats. We produce millions of white blood cells that hunt and destroy anything foreign. He showed Vecthor microscopic footage of human immune cells attacking bacteria. The white blood cells moved with purpose, surrounding and consuming the invaders. Sometimes our immune system attacks us by mistake. We call them autoimmune diseases. But even then, humans can live for years with their own body fighting itself. We just manage it with medicine, Ben said. Your species evolved to be nearly indestructible, Vecthor said quietly. Ben laughed. Not indestructible. Just very persistent. We're hard to kill, and even harder to keep down. Oh, and I should mention our healing capabilities. He showed images of wound healing over time. Cuts that sealed themselves. Broken bones that fused back together stronger than before. Skin that regenerated over burns. Humans regularly poison themselves for recreation, Ben added casually. Alcohol. Caffeine. Nicotine. These are toxins that we consume voluntarily. Alcohol especially is literally poisonous, but we drink it socially. Our liver processes it. And we recover. Vecthor stared at him. You intentionally poison yourselves? For fun, yes. In moderation, it's relatively safe. Our bodies are very good at processing toxins. We evolved eating a varied diet, including some mildly toxic plants. We built up resistances, Ben explained. The meeting lasted 3 hours. With each new fact, Vecthor felt his understanding of humanity shift. These were not delicate beings that needed protection. They were survivors, built by evolution to endure and persist. That afternoon, Lisa took him to meet Dr. Kate Morrison, a psychologist. Her office was comfortable and quiet, with soft lighting and calming colors. She offered Vecthor tea, which he accepted gratefully, needing something to settle his nerves. Dr. Martinez tells me you're learning about humanity, Kate said gently. The physical aspects are impressive, I know. But I think our psychology is equally important to understand. She pulled up charts and studies on her screen. Humans have something we call resilience. It's the ability to recover from trauma and adversity. Most humans will experience significant trauma in their lives. Loss of loved ones, natural disasters, accidents, violence. These experiences would break many species psychologically, but not humans, Vecthor guessed. Not usually, no, Kate confirmed. We have something called post-traumatic growth. Humans often become stronger after surviving terrible events. We find meaning in suffering. We use our pain to develop empathy and wisdom. We rebuild. She showed him studies of disaster survivors. People who had lost everything in earthquakes, floods, and wars. The data showed that most eventually recovered and built new lives. Many reported feeling stronger and more appreciative of life after their experiences. Humans also have remarkable hope, Kate continued. Even in the darkest situations, we tend to believe things will improve. This optimism helps us survive. We've had prisoners of war held in terrible conditions for years who never gave up hope. They survived through sheer willpower, She showed him historical accounts, explorers who endured months in frozen wastelands with limited supplies, astronauts who remained calm when their spacecraft malfunctioned in the vacuum of space, survivors of plane crashes who walked for days through hostile terrain to reach safety. We also form strong social bonds, Kate explained. Humans are pack animals, like your species. But we take it further. We bond not just with family and friends, but with strangers. We bond with our pets, our machines, even concepts and ideas. This ability to form connections gives us strength. She pulled up footage from a disaster in a city called New York. Vector watched as buildings collapsed and people fled in panic. Some humans were running toward the destruction, not away from it. Those are first responders, Kate said. Firefighters, police, medical personnel. When everyone else runs from danger, they run toward it. Not because they have to, but because they choose to. They risk their lives to save strangers. That's irrational, Vector said. Is it? Or is it the highest form of rationality? Protecting the group ensures the species survives. Humans have always had individuals willing to sacrifice for the greater good. We call them heroes, but really, they're just doing what humans do, Kate said softly. She showed him more examples. Teachers who had shielded students during shootings, civilians who had pulled people from burning cars, strangers who had donated organs to save lives. This behavior appears across all human cultures and throughout our history, Kate explained. It's not taught. It's innate. When others are in danger, many humans will risk themselves to help. We can't help it. Vector watched the footage in silence. The Zenthari would help their own family groups, but risking death for strangers was unheard of. It would be seen as wasteful and illogical. There's one more thing you should understand, Kate said. Humans have an unusual relationship with death. We know we're going to die. We're one of the few species on Earth that fully comprehends our own mortality. And instead of being paralyzed by this knowledge, we use it as motivation. She pulled up quotes from human philosophers and writers. People who had written about death and meaning and purpose. The common thread was that death made life precious. Knowing their time was limited made humans want to achieve, to create, to leave something behind. We don't just accept death. We defy it. We fight it with everything we have. Our medical science is largely focused on extending life and defeating death. We see it as an enemy to be conquered, not a natural end to accept peacefully, Kate said. That evening, Jake Harrison invited Vector to dinner. They met at a quiet restaurant with a view of the city lights. Jake ordered wine and food, and they sat on an outdoor terrace where the air was cool and pleasant. I hear you've been learning a lot about us, Jake said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. Too much, Vector admitted. Your scientists are very thorough. Jake smiled slightly. They are. But sometimes the best way to understand people is through their stories, not their statistics. He took a sip of wine and looked out at the city. My grandfather fought in one of our major wars. He was captured by the enemy and held in a prison camp for 2 years. They tortured him for information. They starved him. He watched his friends die. Vector listened, his food forgotten. Eventually, he escaped. Walked through enemy territory for 3 weeks, living off insects and rainwater. Made it back to friendly forces and immediately volunteered to return to combat. After the war ended, he came home, married my grandmother, started a business, raised 4 children. He lived to be 93 years old. Jake continued. How did he recover from such trauma? Vector asked. That's the thing, Ambassador. He didn't see it as unusual. To him, it was just what happened. Just his life. He told me those stories the same way he told me about his first car or his favorite fishing spot. They were all just memories. Jake said. He turned to look at Vector directly. Every human family has stories like this. Every single one. We've all descended from people who survived wars, famines, plagues, and disasters. Survival isn't special to us. It's just what we do. You don't see yourselves as extraordinary, Vector realized. No, we don't. This is normal for us. They finished dinner in silence. Vector could not find words to respond. As he walked back to his quarters that night, he understood that humans were far more dangerous than he had imagined. Not because they were violent or aggressive, but because they had no concept of how terrifying they truly were. They thought their resilience was normal. They thought their refusal to give up was ordinary. They thought their willingness to die for strangers was just basic decency. Commander Ryan Blake arrived early the next morning with a different vehicle. This one was larger and more rugged, designed for rough terrain. Vector climbed in, noting the various equipment secured in the back. "Today you'll see how human soldiers operate," Blake explained as they drove away from the city. "We're going to a training facility where a squad is running through hostile environment scenarios. I thought you should see what humans can do when things get difficult." The facility was located in a remote area surrounded by hills and forest. High fences marked the perimeter, and guards checked their identification at multiple checkpoints. Blake drove to an observation building overlooking a vast training ground. Inside, a row of screens showed different camera angles of the terrain below. Blake introduced Vector to a training coordinator named Helen Rogers, who explained the exercise. "We have a 6-person squad down there. They're simulating a rescue mission in hostile territory. The environment includes extreme heat, limited water, simulated enemy contact, and injured team members. They have 6 hours to complete the objectives," Helen said. Vector watched the screens. The terrain looked brutal. Rocky desert with no shade, temperatures that had to be over 40 degrees Celsius. 6 humans moved through it in full combat gear, carrying heavy equipment. "That heat would kill most council species in under an hour," Vector observed. "These soldiers are trained for it," Blake said. "Humans evolved in hot climates. We're actually better at dealing with heat than cold, though we can handle both." The squad moved with practiced efficiency. They communicated through hand signals and brief radio messages. Their leader was a woman named Nicole Price, who kept the team coordinated while navigating the terrain. They reached their first objective and secured it quickly. Then the simulation threw problems at them. Simulated enemy fire from hidden positions. One squad member, a young man named Kevin Hall, went down with a simulated injury. The others immediately adapted. 2 soldiers provided covering fire while Nicole assessed Kevin's injury. Another soldier called for evacuation, while the remaining 2 secured a defensive position. They did all of this within seconds, without panic, without confusion. "They train for chaos," Blake explained. "Human combat isn't about perfect plans. It's about adapting when everything goes wrong. Because things always go wrong." The squad carried their injured member and continued the mission. The cameras showed the strain on their faces, the sweat soaking through their uniforms. But they kept moving. They reached the second objective, completed it, and began their extraction route. The simulation hit them with another problem. Their planned extraction point was compromised. Nicole made a quick decision and led the team to an alternate location. They had to cross 3 kilometers of open ground while carrying Kevin and their equipment. Vector watched in growing amazement. They should have been exhausted. The heat, the weight, the stress, all of it should have broken them. But they just kept going. They reached the extraction point with 20 minutes to spare. The simulation ended, and the squad gathered in the shade, drinking water and reviewing their performance. They were tired, but not defeated. Some were laughing at mistakes they had made. Blake took Vector down to meet them. Up close, the soldiers looked young and surprisingly friendly. Nicole Price was barely 30 years old, with sun-damaged skin and sharp eyes. She smiled when Blake introduced the ambassador. "Sorry you had to see us at our worst," she joked. "Kevin here had to go and get himself shot in the first hour." Kevin laughed and took the ribbing good-naturedly. "That was your worst?" Vector asked weakly. "We made some sloppy mistakes in the second quadrant," Nicole said seriously. "But we completed the objectives, and everyone's alive. That's what counts." These apex predators talked about their near-death training exercise like it was a normal day at work. They found humor in situations that would traumatize most species. They were friendly and social even after pushing themselves to their physical limits. Blake drove Vector to another facility that afternoon. This one was a research center filled with scientists and engineers. A young woman named Dr. Emma Shaw greeted them enthusiastically. She was maybe 25, with bright eyes and excited energy. "Ambassador Vector, this is so exciting. I can't believe I'm meeting an actual alien." "Sorry, is alien the right word? Or is that offensive?" Emma asked rapidly. "Alien is acceptable," Vector assured her, slightly overwhelmed by her enthusiasm. Emma led them through the facility, talking the entire time. "We're working on next-generation spacecraft here. I heard you offered us faster-than-light technology, which is amazing, but we want to understand the principles ourselves. We're not really comfortable relying completely on technology we don't understand." She showed him designs for ships that hadn't been built yet. Some were for deep space exploration. Others were for asteroid mining operations. Several were military vessels designed to protect human interests in space. "This one is my favorite," Emma said, pulling up a detailed schematic. "We call it the Defender class. It's designed for system defense. 6 missile banks, particle beam weapons, redundant power systems, and armor that can withstand sustained fire." Vector looked at the specifications and felt his blood run cold. The weapons systems were beyond anything most Council species had developed. Humans had theorized ways to kill that the galaxy had never imagined. "This is a warship," he said quietly. "Well, yes," Emma agreed. "We don't know what's out there beyond Earth. We hope for peaceful contact. Like with you. But we prepare for the worst. It's just sensible planning. But if the Council accepts you, we provide security," Vector said. Emma's expression became polite but firm. "We appreciate that. But humans prefer to be able to defend themselves. We have a saying: hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We'll gladly be part of a peaceful alliance. But we won't give up our ability to protect ourselves." She showed him more designs. Exploration ships with weapons hidden in their structures. Science vessels that could double as troop transports. Mining equipment that could be converted to military use with simple modifications. "You're preparing for war," Vector said. "We're preparing for anything," Emma corrected. "War, peace, natural disasters, first contact with hostile species. We plan for every scenario we can imagine. Humans learned a long time ago that being unprepared is dangerous. We lost millions of lives learning that lesson. We won't forget it." Dodd. That evening, Jake Harrison came to Vector's quarters. The ambassador was reviewing his notes and trying to understand what he had learned. Jake knocked politely and entered when invited. "You've had a busy week," Jake observed, sitting down without being asked. His casual manner no longer seemed friendly to Vector. It seemed like the confidence of a predator that knew it held all the advantages. "I have learned much about humanity," Vector said carefully. "Perhaps more than I wanted to know." Jake smiled slightly. "I imagine so. Ambassador, it's time we had an honest conversation. You came here offering us membership in your council. We appreciate the offer. We truly do. But we need to discuss the terms." Vector felt tension in his shoulders. "The terms are standard for all species. They ensure peace and prosperity. For species that need protection, maybe," Jake said. "But humans don't need protection, Ambassador. We need partners, allies, equals. The Council does not negotiate with primitive species," Vector said, the words coming out automatically. Jake's expression hardened slightly. "Then we have a problem. Because Earth will not surrender our weapons, We will not limit our expansion into space. We will not submit to council laws without equal representation in making those laws. We've fought too hard for our independence to give it up now. You would refuse the benefits of galactic civilization? Vector asked, shocked. We would refuse to be second-class citizens in it, Jake corrected. Ambassador, let me be clear. Humanity wants to join the galaxy. We want to meet other species. We want to share knowledge and build friendships. We want peace. But we learned centuries ago that lasting peace comes from mutual respect, not from one side disarming while the other holds all the power. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. We will keep our nuclear weapons. We will continue developing our military. We will expand into space at our own pace. And we will maintain our sovereignty. Those are our conditions. The Council will never accept those terms, Vector said. Then we'll remain independent, Jake said simply. We'll develop faster than light, travel ourselves eventually. We'll explore the galaxy on our own terms. We'll meet other species and form our own alliances. The Council can be part of that future, or not. The choice is yours. 1. The certainty in Jake's voice shook Vector. This was not bluffing. Humans would actually turn down everything the Council offered, rather than surrender their independence. They would choose to stand alone, rather than kneel together. You're dangerous, Vector said quietly. Your species is aggressive and violent. You develop weapons that could destroy planets. You refuse to accept the wisdom of older civilizations. The Council exists to prevent species like yours from threatening galactic peace. Jake was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, but no less firm. We are dangerous, Ambassador. You're right about that. But we're dangerous because we choose to be. We could be peaceful herbivores like your species, but evolution made us hunters. We could disarm and trust others to protect us, but history taught us that's foolish. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. But here's what you need to understand. We're dangerous to threats, not to friends. We choose peace when we can. We defend ourselves when we must. And we protect those we care about with everything we have. He turned back to Vector. If the Council accepts us as equals, we'll be the best allies you've ever had. We'll fight beside you. We'll share our innovations. We'll stand with you against any threat. But we'll do it as partners, not as subjects. And if the Council refuses? Vector asked. Then we go our separate ways. No hard feelings. We'll meet again someday. Probably when we've developed our own faster-than-light drives. Maybe by then, the Council will be ready to negotiate, Jake said. He moved toward the door, then paused. Ambassador, you came here thinking you'd found another primitive species to uplift. But humans don't need uplifting. We need respect. Give us that, and you'll have loyal friends. Try to control us, and you'll have a problem you can't solve. Centene. Trinus. Trinus sins. Trinus. Trinus sins. Jake left, closing the door quietly behind him. Vector stood alone in his quarters, his mind racing. Everything about this mission had gone wrong. Humans were not what he expected. They were not what anyone expected. They were strong when they should be weak. They were unified when they should be divided. They chose peace while building for war. They offered friendship while refusing to submit. They were contradictions that somehow worked. And what terrified Vector most was the realization that humans meant every word. They would actually stand alone against the entire galaxy rather than surrender their independence. They would develop their own technology, build their own ships, and make their own way among the stars. And eventually, they would succeed. Because that's what humans did. They survived. They persisted. They refused to give up. No matter the odds. The Council needed to know. But how could he make them understand? How could he explain that humanity was not a species to be uplifted, but a force to be reckoned with? Vector spent the night writing and deleting reports. Nothing he wrote seemed adequate to convey what he had learned. By morning, he had decided. He would return to the council and deliver his report in person. They needed to see his face, hear his voice, and understand the fear that now lived permanently in his eyes. The morning of departure arrived too quickly. Vector packed his few belongings and prepared to leave Earth. Dr. Lisa Martinez and Commander Ryan Blake came to see him off at the landing site where he had first arrived 2 weeks ago. The desert looked the same as it had on that first day, but Vector had changed. The confident diplomat who had landed with expectations of an easy integration was gone. In his place stood someone who had seen too much and understood too little. Lisa handed him a small package wrapped in simple paper. "A gift," she said with a warm smile. "Some human poetry. I thought you might enjoy reading about how we see ourselves." Vector accepted it carefully. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez. You have been a gracious guide." Blake extended his hand for the final time. His grip was firm, but controlled, careful not to hurt. "Safe travels, Ambassador. I hope your council makes the right decision." "As do I," Vector said quietly, though he was no longer sure what the right decision was. He climbed aboard his ship and sealed the airlock. As the vessel lifted off, he watched Earth shrink below him. The blue planet that humanity called home looked peaceful from space. Beautiful. It gave no hint of the dangerous species that lived on its surface. The journey back to Council space took 3 weeks. Vector spent the time trying to write his report. He started over countless times. How could words convey what he had experienced? How could data and statistics communicate the feeling of watching humans casually discuss surviving scenarios that would destroy other species? He opened Lisa's gift one evening when sleep would not come. The book contained poems written by humans throughout their history. He read about love and loss, war and peace, hope and despair. The words were beautiful and terrible. One poem described a human who had lost everything but chose to continue living. Another celebrated the small joys found in dark times. A third spoke of standing against impossible odds simply because it was the right thing to do. Humans wrote poetry about their suffering and made it beautiful. They turned their pain into art. They found meaning in situations that should have broken them. Even their creative works revealed their nature as survivors who refused to surrender. Vector set the book aside and stared out at the stars. Humanity was coming to those stars, whether the council welcomed them or not. The only question was whether they would come as friends or as strangers. His ship finally entered council space. The great station that housed the council chamber appeared ahead. A massive structure that had taken 50 species 200 years to build. It was meant to inspire awe and demonstrate the power of cooperation. Vector docked and made his way to the council chamber. Word of his arrival had spread. Council members gathered early, curious about Earth and humanity. They expected a routine report on another successful integration. The chamber filled with representatives from 200 species. Some were humanoid like the Zenthari. Others were entirely different, ranging from floating gas beings to crystalline entities. All of them had learned to coexist peacefully under council law. Vector walked to the center platform where speakers stood. The lights focused on him, and the chamber fell silent. He looked around at the assembled representatives and realized they had no idea what was coming. He stood in silence for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. His hands trembled slightly. A Zenthari sitting in the front row noticed and frowned with concern. "Honored council members," Vector began, his voice rougher than usual. "I have returned from Earth with a report on humanity and their suitability for council membership." He paused, looking at their expectant faces. "I recommend that we extend full membership to Earth, with equal voting rights and no restrictions on their sovereignty." Confused murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was not standard procedure. Primitive species always entered as junior members with limited rights. Vector continued before anyone could interrupt. This recommendation comes not from a belief that humans are peaceful and will easily integrate. It comes from the understanding that humans are dangerous, and we want them as allies rather than as enemies. The murmurs grew louder. Vector activated his presentation display. Images from Earth appeared. Cities and landscapes, technology and weapons, humans in various situations. Humanity is not like other species we have integrated, he said. They are persistence hunters, evolved to chase prey until it dies from exhaustion. Their bodies are redundant systems designed to survive massive damage. They can lose organs, break bones, and suffer injuries that would kill any Xanthari, and they simply recover. He showed them footage from the museums. The wars, the weapons, the destruction. The council members watched in growing horror. Humans nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, Vector explained. They developed nuclear weapons and used them. They fought wars that killed tens of millions. They created diseases that wiped out populations. He showed them Amy Collins flying her fighter jet, pulling forces that should have been fatal. He showed them the soldiers completing their training mission in conditions that would kill most species. He showed them the weapon systems Emma Shaw had designed. Humans can withstand 9 times their planet's gravity. They survive in environments, from frozen wastelands to scorching deserts. They heal from wounds that should be fatal. They have an immune system that wages war inside their own bodies. They regularly consume poisons for recreation, Vector said, his voice growing stronger. But physical capability is not what makes them truly dangerous, he continued. Humans have psychological resilience that defies understanding. They grow stronger from trauma. They find hope in hopeless situations. They bond with strangers and risk their lives to save them. They refuse to give up, even when any rational being would surrender. He showed them footage of the disaster responders running toward danger. The stories of Jake Harrison's grandfather, surviving prison camps and torture. The medical cases of humans surviving impossible injuries. They do not see themselves as unusual, Vector said quietly. This is normal to them. Every human family has stories of survival that would be legends among our species. They consider it ordinary life. The council chamber was completely silent now. Every representative watched with focused attention. I presented them with our standard offer, Vector continued. Access to advanced technology in exchange for following council protocols and surrendering dangerous weapons. They refused. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Humans will not surrender their weapons. They will not limit their expansion. They will not submit to laws they have no voice in creating. They demand equal membership, or they will remain independent, Vector explained. He looked around at the shocked faces. And they mean it. They will develop faster than light, travel themselves eventually. They will explore the galaxy on their own terms. They will meet other species and form their own alliances. We can be part of that future, or we can be irrelevant to it. But we cannot stop it. A council member from the military species called the Kryn stood up. General Toros was large and aggressive, a veteran of the last major conflict the council had faced decades ago. His species valued strength and courage. This is cowardice, Toros declared, his voice booming through the chamber. You want us to surrender to threats from a primitive species? We should reject their demands and quarantine their planet until they learn respect. Other voices joined in agreement. Fear was turning to anger among some representatives. The idea that a newly discovered species could dictate terms to the council was insulting. Vector raised his hand for silence. General Toros, you call me a coward. Perhaps you are right. But let me tell you what frightened me, more than their weapons or their wars. The chamber quieted again. I met a human grandmother named Laura Bennett, Vector said softly. She was 70 years old, kind and gentle. She showed me pictures of her grandchildren and gave me cookies she had baked. He paused, remembering. Laura survived a global pandemic that killed millions when she was young. She raised 3 children alone. After her husband died in an accident, she lost her home to a natural disaster and rebuilt it herself. She survived cancer twice. She helped establish a community center that feeds hungry people every day. Vector looked directly at Taurus. And she considered her life unremarkable. She said she was just an ordinary person who had been lucky. This woman had survived more than most Zenthari experience in 10 lifetimes, and she called it ordinary. He let that sink in. That is what terrifies me, General. Not the soldiers or the weapons, but the fact that every human is a survivor. Every single one has a story that would be extraordinary among our species. And they just call it life. The chamber was silent. Representatives looked at each other uncertainly. Humans are not peaceful by nature. Vector continued. They are predators who choose peace. They are survivors who want cooperation. They are warriors who prefer diplomacy. But make no mistake, if we treat them as inferiors, if we try to control them, they will resist. And they are very, very good at resistance. He took a deep breath. We have 2 choices. Welcome them as equals and gain powerful allies who value loyalty and friendship, or reject their terms and watch them develop on their own, knowing that someday they will reach our level of technology and remember how we treated them. He looked around the chamber one final time. I have spent 2 weeks with humans. I have seen what they are capable of. And I believe that having them as friends is infinitely better than having them as unknowns. Because the only thing more dangerous than a known human is an unknown human variable in our galaxy. Vector stepped back from the center platform, his speech finished. Some representatives argued for accepting Earth's terms. Others demanded rejection and isolation. The discussion went on for hours. Finally, they voted. The result was not unanimous, but it was clear. The Council would accept Earth's conditions. Humanity would be welcomed as equal members with full voting rights and no restrictions on their sovereignty. Several representatives approached Vector afterward. Some thanked him for his wisdom. Others accused him of fear-mongering. General Taurus simply stared at him with an expression somewhere between disgust and curiosity. After the vote, Vector submitted his resignation from diplomatic service. He had done enough. He was tired. The Council accepted it without argument. His replacement could handle Earth relations going forward. Vector returned to his homeworld and retired to a quiet life. He never spoke publicly about Earth again. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit outside and look up at the stars. He would think about Jake Harrison and Lisa Martinez and Ryan Blake and all the other humans he had met. He would think about Amy Collins, laughing after pulling 9 Gs. He would think about Nicole Price, leading her squad through impossible conditions. He would think about Laura Bennett, baking cookies, and calling her extraordinary life ordinary. And he would wonder what humans were building out there in the darkness. What ships they were designing. What weapons they were developing. What corners of the galaxy they were preparing to explore. He prayed that whatever humanity became, it remained pointed outward at external threats, rather than inward at the Council. Because he had seen what humans could do when they chose to survive, and nothing in 3 galaxies could stop them. 50 years passed. Vector was old now, living quietly on his homeworld. Then news came that changed everything. A hostile species from beyond Council space had invaded with overwhelming force. They had technology the Council had never seen. Weapons that broke through shields. Ships that moved faster than Council vessels. Council worlds fell one after another. Desperate calls for help went out across the galaxy. The Council military mobilized but was outmatched. Fear spread as the invaders pushed deeper into Council space. Then humanity answered the call. Human ships arrived first at the border worlds under attack. Not the primitive vessels Vector had seen in Emma Shaw's plans, but something new and terrible. Fast ships with weapons that tore through the invaders' defenses. Human soldiers who fought with impossible courage and refused to retreat. Vector watched the broadcasts from his home. He saw human fleets turn the tide of battle. He saw their soldiers holding positions that other species had abandoned. He saw their commanders making decisions that saved millions of lives. Humans were not fighting because they had to. Earth was far from the invasion zone, safe from immediate threat. They fought because Council worlds were under attack, because they had made promises to their allies, because that was what humans did when something they cared about was threatened. The war lasted 3 years. By the end, humanity had lost thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. But they never wavered. They just kept coming, kept fighting, kept refusing to surrender. When peace finally returned, it was human negotiators who secured the treaty, human engineers who helped rebuild destroyed worlds, human medical personnel who treated the wounded of every species. The Council learned what Vector had tried to tell them 50 years ago. Humans were not dangerous because they loved war. They were dangerous because they loved peace enough to fight for it. They were loyal to their allies beyond reason. They protected the weak, even at great cost to themselves. One evening, as Vector sat watching the sunset on his homeworld, a message arrived. It was from Jake Harrison's granddaughter, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Council. She had learned that Vector was the first ambassador to visit Earth decades ago. Her message was simple and kind. She thanked him for his report to the Council. She said that humanity valued the friendship that had grown between Earth and the Council. She hoped he was living well in his retirement. Vector composed a careful reply. He thanked her and congratulated humanity on their courage during the war. He did not mention the fear he had felt that first time on Earth. He did not mention the nightmares he still sometimes had about a species too strong and too determined to be stopped. Instead, he wrote that he was grateful humans had chosen to be friends, that the galaxy was better for their presence, that he hoped future generations would remember this alliance and keep it strong. He sent the message and returned to watching the sunset. The fear was still there, buried deep, but alongside it was something else now. Pride, perhaps, that he had made the right recommendation all those years ago. Relief that humans had proven to be exactly what they promised. Dangerous friends, rather than dangerous enemies. And gratitude that when the galaxy needed heroes, humanity had answered the call. Vector died peacefully 2 years later, surrounded by family. His last thoughts were of a blue planet orbiting a yellow star, and the impossible species that called it home, and that terrified Vector more than anything else he had learned.